Hello everybody. Today I'm going to tell you about the changes in demand curve due to change in the price of complementary goods. As we can see here, two diagrams on the screen. That is now in one diagram you can see that the shift takes place towards the right hand side, and in the other diagram we see that the shift takes place towards the left hand side. So this is right hand shift, this is leftward shift. Now why does it happen? Let us take the example of complementary goods in order to understand this. Let's take the example of tea and sugar. Tea, the given good, and sugar, the complementary good. Now students, what happens if the price of sugar rises? If the price of sugar rises, consuming tea will become expensive or it will become cheaper. Okay, because the price of sugar has risen, so as a result, consuming tea will become expensive. So the demand of tea will decrease, which is represented by a leftward shift in the demand curve from DD to D1, D1. That is, earlier the quantity demanded of tea was OQ, now it is OQ1. So because of increase in the price of sugar, that is a complementary good, the demand of the given good, that is tea, it decreases, which is represented by a leftward shift in the demand curve. Now let us focus on the other diagram. If there is decrease in the price of sugar, so what happens now? Consuming tea becomes cheaper. So as a result, the demand of tea will increase, which is represented by a rightward shift in the demand curve from DD to D1, D1. Earlier, the quantity demanded of tea was OQ. Now it has shifted from OQ1. So it shows that, students, there is a negative relationship between price of complementary good and demand of the given good. If the price of sugar increases, so the demand of tea falls. And if the price of sugar falls, the demand of sugar increases. So even you can get a question in regard to the same. How the question can be framed? If X and Y are two goods, and these two goods are inversely related to each other, or even it can be framed in such a way that if X and Y are two goods, and if the increase in price of good X leads to a fall in the demand of good Y, so how are these two goods related to each other? So your answer will be, these are complementary goods. Similarly, you may get another question related to substitute goods, because in case of substitute goods, the relationship is direct. So how do you explain how the question can be raised? If X and Y are two goods, and if rise in the price of good X leads to the rise in the demand of good Y, so how are these two goods related to each other? So your answer will be, they are substitute goods, because in case of substitute good, what exists is a positive effect or a direct relation, and what exists in case of complementary good is an inverse relationship between price of complementary good and demand of the given good. Now we see a diagrammatic presentation of normal goods. What do we see, students? First, before I proceed ahead with this diagram, I would like to take an example of normal and inferior good. Now you all know, like earlier also I've taken this example. Color television, let's take the example as normal good. Black and white television, the example of inferior good. So we talk about color television right now. So what do we see on the x-axis? We have taken demand of color television in units, and on the y-axis we have taken the income of the consumer. So what has been done now in case of normal good? If the income of the consumer rises, so the demand of normal good also rises. So in case of normal good, the demand of normal good and the income of the consumer establishes the direct relationship. But In case of inferior goods, it establishes an inverse relationship, and that is why it is represented by a downward sloping curve. So we have taken the example of black and white TV as an inferior good. So we have taken demand of black and white television in units on x-axis and income of the consumer on y-axis. Now what happens is, let's take an example. If the income of the consumer rises, so as a result, what happens to the demand of black and white television? The demand of black and white television falls, because when the income of the consumer rises, he starts demanding more of normal good and less of inferior good. On the other hand, if the income of the consumer decreases or falls, so in case of decrease in the income, he demands less of normal good and more of inferior good. So that is the reason income of the consumer and demand of inferior good establishes inverse relationship. And any two variables, as I told you earlier also, and repeating that any two variables, when they establish an inverse relationship, so the diagram representing their relationship will always be a downward sloping curve. Now, we see one more diagram here, wherein the effect on demand curve of normal as well as a normal good is being depicted here. That what happens to the demand of normal good when there is changes in the income of the consumer. Now let's focus on figure 3.18. We see that there is a rightward shift in the demand curve from DD to D1. And why is it happening? In this case, again, what we take is, we take the demand of color television on the x-axis and the price of color television on the y-axis. As I told you, whenever we draw a demand curve, it is always necessary that the demand of whatever goods you are taking on the x-axis, the price of the similar good you will take on the y-axis. So we see that the demand is rightward shift. It has shifted towards the right hand side. The reason behind, because of increase, we assume here that the income of the consumer has increased. So as a result, the demand of color television will rise, which is represented by a rightward shift in demand curve from DD to D1. And in case when the income of the consumer decrease, effect on demand curve of normal good due to decrease in income. So there will be leftward shift if the income of the consumer decrease, so he will be purchasing less of normal good. So his demand curve shifts from DD to D1. So leftward shift in the demand curve. Now students, that's all for today. We studied the effect on effect on demand curve we are studying due to other factors apart from its own price. As already discussed with you, if the changes takes place in respect of its own price only, so in that case there will be movement along the demand curve and not shift in demand curve. Shift in demand curve takes place due to other factors like price of substitute good, price of changes in the price of complementary good, effect on demand curve due to normal good, and then the inferior good we are going to continue tomorrow. Thank you so much.